The applause is a ghost that still haunts my ears. 20 million views. My TED Talk on behavioral prediction wasn't just a success, it was a global phenomenon. My name, Elias Vance, once a footnote in Sentient Data Lab's reports, was now a headline. They called it genius. I call it a curse, because the man on that stage, confident, poised, charismatic, was a carefully constructed lie. The real Elias is hiding in a darkened Cambridge office, heart pounding against his ribs as the CEO's name flashes on his phone. The man who once called me bashful at company meetings now wants a piece of the spotlight. The lie, my meticulously crafted revenge, is about to be tested. And I am terrified. My thumb hovers, then accepts the call. Arthur, I manage. The voice a practiced, steady baritone I'd spent 6 months perfecting. Elias, my star. Arthur Sterling's voice boomed, oozing a camaraderie he'd never shown me in 20 years. This was the man who once patted my head at a Christmas party, telling the board I was too bashful for client-facing roles. The man who saw my data, but never me. Now, he only saw the view count. We're striking while the iron's hot, he barrels on, not waiting for a reply. I've booked you on the morning news circuit, a keynote in Zurich. We're putting a face to the name, son. Zurich. A live audience, my blood runs cold. The room feels airless, the walls closing in. The man on that stage was a ghost, a carefully programmed puppet. I can't wind him up again. Elias, you hear me? Arthur's voice sharpens with impatience. I force a breath, gripping the edge of my desk until my knuckles are white. Loud and clear, Arthur, I say, the puppet's voice smooth as glass. Send me the itinerary. The call ends. Silence rushes back into the office, thick and suffocating. Zurich. The word hangs in the air, a death sentence. It wasn't the first time my work was destined for a European stage. 3 years ago, it was Geneva. Project Chimera. It was my baby, an algorithm that could predict consumer desire before the consumer even knew it existed. It was going to redefine the company. Redefine me. I remember standing in Arthur's glass-walled office, my report clutched in a sweating hand, trying to articulate the sheer revolutionary power of what I'd built. He wasn't looking at me. He was watching Mark Renshaw, our vapidly handsome VP of Sales, charm a potential client in the hallway. Arthur finally turned, his gaze sliding over me as if I were a piece of furniture. Elias, you're a wizard with the numbers, we all know that, he'd said, his voice laced with that infuriatingly paternal tone. But this is the big leagues. Geneva, we need a showman, not a librarian. He took my report from my hands. Mark will present it. He knows how to work a room. I just stood there, speechless. My voice, my actual voice, was a traitor. A knot of useless air in my throat. I watched as Arthur briefed a preening Mark, using my key phrases, my data points. 2 weeks later, Mark was on the cover of a trade magazine, hailed as a visionary. He got the promotion, the bonus, the corner office that should have been mine. And me? Arthur found me by the coffee machine a week later. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a pushdown than a lift-up. Great work on the back end, son, he'd boomed, loud enough for the whole floor to hear. Every star needs a mission control. You're the best mission control we've got. He called me timid, bashful, a brilliant mind best kept behind a closed door. That night, stewing in the fluorescent hum of my empty apartment, something inside me didn't just break, it recalibrated. For 20 years, I had tried to make them see my work. I was wrong. I needed to make them see a man they could believe in. So I did what I do best. I treated my own crippling anxiety not as a flaw, but as a data set. I analyzed thousands of hours of charismatic speakers, mapping their vocal cadences, their micro-expressions, their narrative structures. I built a predictive model for confidence. I spent 6 months in a rented studio with a vocal coach and a body language expert, not learning to be confident, but learning to perfectly simulate it. The man on that TED stage wasn't an evolution. He was an invention, an algorithm of a man, coded line by line out of pure, cold rage. The system worked. It worked too well. And as the email with the Zurich itinerary pings into my inbox, a single, terrifying thought solidifies. I built a ghost, and now they expect him to give a command performance. Zurich. The name was a bitter echo of Geneva. I stared at the flight confirmation on my screen, but I was seeing a different city, a different betrayal. 3 years ago, the process of my erasure had been methodical, almost clinical. It began in that same glass-walled office, with Arthur and Mark Renshaw. I had just finished explaining the predictive engine of Project Chimera, my voice shaking with a passion I rarely showed. Mark, all perfect teeth and empty charm, just smirked. "It's a bit dense, isn't it, Arthur? We'll lose them in the first 5 minutes." Arthur didn't even look at me. He nodded at Mark. "He's right. It needs the Renshaw touch." Sizzle. He turned to me, his expression one of pity. "Elias, you'll prep Mark. Give him the killer soundbites. The big picture stuff." My protest died in my throat, a familiar casualty. Prepping Mark was a week-long exercise in humiliation. We sat in a sterile conference room, my life's work spread across the table. He didn't want to understand the architecture, he wanted slogans. "Okay, so the algorithm, it sees the future?" he'd ask, scrolling through his phone. In a manner of speaking, I'd explain, trying to detail the nuance of the probability matrices. It analyzes latent desire indicators to forecast consumer behavior with 94% accuracy. "Got it. We know what you want before you do." He'd scribbled it on a notepad. "Catchy, what else you got?" I was his ghostwriter. I fed him the lines, the metaphors, the carefully crafted narrative that would make my complex data palatable to a room full of shareholders. He absorbed my words, my passion, and polished it all with his vacuous charisma. I was handing the keys to my kingdom to a man who thought the engine was just a hood ornament. He didn't just steal my work, he made me his accomplice. I didn't go to Geneva. I couldn't. I watched the keynote on a grainy live stream, hunched over my laptop in the dark. There was Mark, on a sprawling stage under a spotlight that should have been mine. He looked magnificent. He delivered my opening line flawlessly. He used my catchphrases. The crowd was mesmerized. When he stumbled over the more complex data points, the ones I'd begged him to study, he just flashed a disarming smile and moved on. They didn't care. They applauded the man, not the ideas. They gave a standing ovation to a thief. The memory fades, leaving the acid taste of old fury. My office is dark again, illuminated only by the glow of the screen. Zurich. The same kind of stage, the same kind of spotlight. But this time, it's my name on the itinerary, my face on the posters. I built a ghost to reclaim what was stolen. I coded a charismatic man out of spite and pain. The irony is so sharp it could draw blood. My revenge was to become a better version of the man who wronged me. And now, that perfect hollow creation is being called to the stage, and I, the ghost in the machine, am the one who has to pull the strings. The problem is, I'm starting to think the strings are wrapped around my own neck. The strings tighten, and for a moment I can't breathe. Then, the algorithm kicks in. The panic recedes, replaced by the cold, clean hum of processing logic. Fear is just a variable. Zurich is a data point. My fingers move across the keyboard, a separate entity. I open a reply to Arthur's assistant. The message is 3 words. Confirmation received. Regards, Elias. No hesitation, no emotion, just execution. The puppet was being called to the stage, so the puppet master had to work. But I wasn't going to just rerun the old code. That program was designed for a controlled environment. Zurich was live, unpredictable. It required an upgrade. It required new data. I bypassed my work server, connecting to a private network, the encryption a familiar comfort. My real work began. I started pulling every public record, every interview, every vapid social media post associated with 2 names, Arthur Sterling and Mark Renshaw. For 3 years they had been ghosts in my machine, haunting my code. Now I was making them the dataset. My office door creaked open. It was Chloe, a junior analyst, her face glowing with admiration. "Mr. Vance? Sorry to interrupt, but wow. Just wow. We're all so proud." Before the TED Talk, she wouldn't have made eye contact with me. I swiveled in my chair, giving her the practiced, warm smile I'd reverse-engineered from a dozen charismatic CEOs. "Thank you, Chloe. The real work is just getting started." The smile didn't reach my eyes. She shuffled awkwardly and backed away, a flicker of uncertainty on her face. She'd come to see a star, she'd found something else entirely. I turned back to the screen as she closed the door. Hours bled together. I wasn't just mapping their professional lives. I was mapping their vanities, their insecurities, their tells. And then I found it. In the background of a photo from a charity gala 2 years ago, a detail so small, so insignificant, it was overlooked by everyone. A connection Mark had tried to bury. A vulnerability, a thread I could pull that would unravel everything. It was the key. The ghost in the machine finally had a weapon. Zurich wasn't a stage for a command performance. It was an ambush. The flight to Zurich was 7 hours of controlled suffocation. Every jolt of turbulence was a hammer blow against my ribs. Every polite chime from the cabin, a siren's wail. The real Elias Vance was a prisoner at 30,000 feet, hands clammy, breath shallow. But the man the flight attendant saw, the one who nodded politely for more water and had his laptop open to a complex-looking presentation, was a statue of calm. He was a lie in business class. I wasn't refining my keynote. I was studying the kill shot. The photo from the gala was minimized in a corner of my screen. There, behind Arthur's braying laugh, was Mark Renshaw. He was younger, his arrogance less polished, shaking hands with the CEO of a ghost. Ethelred Systems. It took me 48 hours of relentless, caffeine-fueled data mining to resurrect that ghost. Ethelred was a tech darling a decade ago, promising revolutionary AI logistics. They burned through $70 million of investor capital in 18 months before imploding. Their flagship product was vaporware, a sophisticated lie built on a rickety framework of falsified data. And Mark Renshaw wasn't just an employee. He was their head of product strategy. His name was on every fraudulent prospectus, every wildly optimistic press release. But when the company dissolved into lawsuits and bankruptcy, his name vanished. Scrubbed from the internet, expunged from his professional history. He'd walked away from the wreckage without a scratch and landed at Sentient Data Labs a month later, selling himself as a visionary. He hadn't just stolen my work in Geneva, his entire career was built on a foundation of theft and deception. Zurich. It wasn't an echo of Geneva anymore, it was a reckoning. At the hotel, Arthur and Mark were waiting for me in the lobby bar, a viper's nest masquerading as a celebration. Arthur clapped me on the shoulder, the same proprietary gesture as always. "There he is, the man of the hour." Mark raised his glass, his smile a perfect predatory crescent. "Elias, you're looking sharp, the spotlight suits you." There was an edge to his voice, a professional curiosity. He was analyzing me, trying to figure out how the timid librarian from the back office had transformed into this. I gave them the smile I had practiced 1,000 times in a mirror. "You learn from the best, Mark," I said, my voice smooth, resonant. "Your Geneva keynote is still the benchmark for stage presence." He preened, accepting the compliment as his due. Arthur beamed, oblivious. "That's what I like to hear. Teamwork." I let the moment hang, then took a sip of my water. "Speaking of benchmarks," I said, my tone casually academic. I was doing some research for tomorrow's talk. On the predictive markers for corporate failure, I stumbled on the most fascinating case study. I paused, letting the bait settle in the water. A defunct startup from about 10 years back, Ethelred Systems. Ever hear of them? The effect was instantaneous. It wasn't a gasp or a flinch. It was subtler, a change in air pressure. I watched Mark's face, not as a man, but as a data analyst. I saw the fractional widening of his pupils, the microscopic tightening of the muscles around his jaw, the way the blood drained. Just slightly, from beneath his perfect tan. He knew. His smile didn't falter, but it became a mask. "Can't say that I have," he said, the words a little too precise. Arthur just shrugged. "Never heard of them. If they failed for a reason. Now, about tomorrow." He kept talking, but I wasn't listening. I had my confirmation. The variable had been tested. The hypothesis was proven. The ghost in the machine had just seen the ghost in Mark Renshaw. I excused myself early, citing the need to rest my voice. "Big day tomorrow," I said, the puppet playing its part to perfection. Back in the sterile quiet of my hotel room, I opened my laptop. I deleted the presentation I had sent Arthur for approval. It was a brilliant, safe, and utterly forgettable talk about the future of behavioral analytics. A placeholder. In its place, I loaded the real keynote. The title slide was simple: The Architecture of Failure, a Post-Mortem Mood. I wasn't going to mention Ethelred. I wasn't going to mention Mark. It was far more elegant than that. I had built a case study of a hypothetical company. A company that promised the world, backed by dazzling presentations and a charismatic product chief. A company whose predictive models were built on a lie. I used Ethelred's exact financial figures, their exact marketing slogans, their exact timeline of collapse. I would present my life's work, the Chimera algorithm, not as a tool for profit, but as a diagnostic tool that could have identified this hypothetical fraud from day one. I would make Mark Renshaw sit in the front row and watch me perform a clinical, data-driven autopsy on his own buried past. I would use my genius to expose his, all while receiving a standing ovation for my insight. Arthur wanted a showman? I would give him one. A showman who could wield data like a scalpel. The next morning, standing in the wings of the stage, the low thunder of 1,000 expectant people vibrated through the floorboards. An assistant clipped a microphone to my lapel, her hands trembling slightly. "They're so excited to see you, Mr. Vance." I nodded, my face a placid mask. Inside, my heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird. The fear was still there, a cold knot of ice in my stomach. But for the first time, something else was there beside it, a cold, clean, processing fury. I looked at my reflection in the darkened monitor beside the curtain. The terrified man was there, in the frantic flicker of my eyes. But the face looking back at him was the ghost, polished, poised, patient. The executioner was ready. The show was about to begin. The announcer's voice boomed my name, a cannon shot in the dark. The ghost walked out into the light. A wave of applause, hot and physical, washed over me. The stage lights were blinding, a sterile sun that bleached all color from the world. My programming took over. I found my mark, a piece of tape on the floor, and turned to face the faceless crowd. Then my eyes adjusted. There they were, front row center. Arthur, beaming like a proud father at a graduation. And beside him, Mark Renshaw, his smile a well-tailored suit he wore over a core of pure vacancy. He gave me a condescending little nod, a king acknowledging a court magician. He had no idea what kind of trick I was about to perform. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but the voice that came from my mouth was steady, resonant, and calm. It was the ghost's voice. "We live in an age of data," I began, the words smooth and practiced. "We believe it can predict the future, chart a course to success, and unlock unprecedented growth." I spent the first 10 minutes building the cage. I talked about behavioral analytics, about the power of our work at Sentient Data Labs, even giving a subtle nod to the work that had led to the Geneva keynote. I saw Arthur swell with pride. Mark looked relaxed, almost bored. He thought he was watching a rerun. The audience was hooked, leaning forward, consuming the persona I had built for them. It was time. But prediction isn't just about forecasting success, I said, my voice dropping a half octave, the practiced shift in tone pulling the room into a deeper silence. It's also about identifying the architecture of failure. The massive screen behind me changed. The slick Sentient Data logo vanished, replaced by a single, stark slide. It read, "A post-mortem I want to present a case study, I continued, my pace deliberate, of a hypothetical company. Let's call them Icarus. A murmur went through the audience. I could feel Mark's posture change. He was no longer relaxed. He was a statue. Icarus was a tech darling a decade ago, I said, starting my walk across the stage. They promised to revolutionize logistics with a proprietary AI. Their slogan was brilliant. I paused, letting my gaze sweep the front row before landing on Mark. The future. Delivered. I saw it. A flicker. A twitch in his jaw. It was the exact slogan from Ethelred's fraudulent prospectus. Arthur glanced at Mark, confused. Mark's smile was nailed in place, but it was cracking at the edges. The next slide appeared. A financial chart. A dizzying upward curve. They raised $70 million in 18 months. Their charismatic head of product was a master salesman. He dazzled investors. He captivated the media. I didn't have to look at Mark. I could feel the heat of his panic from 20 feet away. I clicked the remote. Another slide. An internal memo, redacted but clear. But the data told a different story. The product was a lie, a ghost, a framework of falsified data points designed to create the illusion of function. I walked to the very edge of the stage, leaning forward as if sharing a secret with 1,000 people. The burn rate was catastrophic. The client acquisition numbers were fiction. The entire enterprise was a house of cards, and the only thing holding it together was charisma. Mark had gone pale beneath his tan. A fine sheen of sweat was visible on his forehead under the stage lights. He was staring at me now, his eyes wide with a dawning, animal terror. He looked like a man watching a surgeon lay out his own organs on a table. Arthur was no longer confused. His face was a thundercloud of comprehension. He was looking at Mark, then at me, the gears of his cynical mind grinding, calculating the fallout. The liability bomb sitting next to him was about to detonate. I clicked to my final slide. There it was. The elegant, intricate architecture of Project Chimera. My work. My real work. Failure leaves a footprint, I said, my voice ringing with a power that was finally truly my own. The right algorithm can see it. It can detect the inconsistencies. It can flag the statistical impossibilities. It can see the ghost in the machine. I turned from the audience and looked directly at Mark Renshaw. A tool like this, I said, gesturing to my life's work on the screen, would have identified the fraud at Icarus within a day. It would have saved investors $70 million. It would have exposed the lie before it ever took flight. I let the statement hang in the air, a death sentence delivered with surgical precision. Then, I turned back to the audience. The future isn't about predicting success. It's about making failure impossible. Silence. For a full 3 seconds, the world held its breath. Then, the applause started. It wasn't. The applause wasn't a ghost this time. It was a tidal wave, a solid wall of sound that hit me with physical force. It washed over the persona on stage and, for the first time, reached the man inside. I didn't smile. I just nodded, a single, final acknowledgement, and walked off into the dim chaos of the wings. They were waiting, just as the algorithm predicted. 2 sharks in a feeding frenzy, realizing they were the bait. Mark was a wreck. His face was the color of ash, his bespoke suit suddenly looking 2 sizes too big. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a deck. But no sound came out. Arthur, however, was pure venom. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in like claws. "What in God's name did you just do?" he hissed. His voice a low growl more terrifying than any shout. His eyes darted around, checking if anyone could hear. "You just detonated a bomb in my company, on my stage." The ghost was gone. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath my ribs, but it was just noise now. The signal was clear. It was just me, Elias Vance, looking the man who had erased me in the eye. I met his gaze. "Your stage?" I asked, my voice quiet, devoid of the practiced baritone. It was my own. "The one you sent Mark to in Geneva? The one where he presented my work?" I pulled my arm from his grip, a simple, effortless motion. "I didn't detonate a bomb, Arthur. I ran a diagnostic. It appears the company has a pre-existing condition, a structural weakness." I looked past him, at the hollowed-out shell of Mark Renshaw. "And you," I said, my voice flat, clinical, "you were never a showman. You were just a bad line of code." Arthur was speechless, his face a mask of apoplectic rage and dawning horror. He knew. He knew he'd have to cut Mark loose, that the investors would ask questions, that the man he'd dismissed as bashful now held the company's reputation in the palm of his hand. I didn't wait for a reply. There was nothing left to process. I turned and walked down the long, quiet corridor, the thunder of their applause for my creation echoing behind me. But for the first time, I was the one walking away. What's the one skill or passion you have that would completely surprise the people who think you're quiet? Share it in the comments.